We're now up to Mem Zayin with base. And again, we're presenting Rava's understanding of Shavuos Hashem Tia Ben Shem V'lo Ben Ayosh. I Amrit Bishlema Aviv Ki Hai Gavna Mechayev. Why do we need a pasuk to tell us that the Yorshim don't have an obligation to take the Shvuah? That would make sense if you're talking about, let's say in a case of Shmira, right? Monali biyodcha, meaning, or biyad Abba, meaning my father had deposited money in the hands of your father. Now, if the father had been alive and he admits that he owes 50 out of the 100, he doesn't know about the other 50, he claims ignorance, then he would have to pay the entire sum. Why? Because once he's chayav a shvuah of modem miktsas, and he can't take the shvuah on the other 50 because he's lo yadan, he doesn't know, then he has to shell out the other 50. And this reflects the principle of Rabbi Abba, that mitoch sheni yochel yishav mishayim, like in the case of Naska the Rabbi Abba. So it's to kro lemifte gabi Yorshim. Now we're going to say that although we would have understood, if not for the pasuk, if not for the miyut, then in such a case the defendant would have to pay because he can't take a shvuah of lo yadana, and apply that same yardstick to the Yorshim in the case where the defendant died, and the Yorshim likewise can't take the shvuah because it's lo yadana. Comes along the Torah with a special miyut, v'lo ben Yorshim, that the Yorshim are exempt from the shvuah. So we go back to a case of lo yadana, and a lo yadana they don't have to pay, they don't have liability. But if you would reject Naska de Rabbi Abba, and you would say that since the father, if he would have been alive, is a lo yadana situation, he doesn't know, and therefore we cannot impose a shvu on him, and he would be potur. So if he'd be potur, how much more so the Yorshim be potur? I don't need a pasuk to tell me v'lo ben a Yorshim. Kra got me Yorshim, lomali, what do I need it? So this is what Rava says. I have support now for Rabbi Abba's claim that the rule of thumb is that mitoch sheni yochel yishav mishalim, which means that, again, as we said earlier, fundamentally when the Torah imposes a shvuah, what the Torah means to say is that he's not believed, he's liable, he has to pay, but the Torah allowed him to take a shvuah. If he can't take the shvuah, we go back to square one, he has to pay. Now the question is, if this drasha of Shavuos Hashem Tia Ben Shem V'lo Ben Yorshim makes sense according to Rabbi Abba, what do we do with this pasuk? How do we darshan it if we hold not like Rabbi Abba? And in the case where we can't take the shvuah, he's potter. For Ravu Shmuel Hai Shavuos Hashem Mai Kadarshi Bei. Right, they say that if the nitbak cannot take the shvuah, he doesn't pay, he's not liable. He's mibayla Sanya Shimon ben Tarfon Omer Shavuos Hashem Tia Ben Shneim Alamid Shashvuah Chala Al Shnehem. And now we're talking about Dinei Onshin. And it means that if Ruvain takes a false oath, he'll be punished. But not only that, Shimon, who was tovea him, and he should have figured out that he's not a reliable guy, and therefore he set up the Shvuah Sheker. He was the one who behind the scenes was the cause of the Shvuah Sheker. He too will be punished. Now, other statements of Shimon ben Tarfon, I don't know if this is Shimon again, the son of Rabbi Tarfon, I don't think so. Azharali okevachar noef minayin. So we're not talking about someone who necessarily implemented an action of adultery, but he kind of was the background cause. Talmud lo sin off, lo san if. So the Mefarshim say that the Torah should have said lo sishkav, because that's the word that Torah uses for the sexual act. And here instead it says lo sinav, and we're darshaning it lo sanif, meaning you shan't be the cause of adultery. What else did we learn from what's his name, Shimon ben Tarfon? And this is from this week's parsha. Vatarognu b'oleim. With the Chet Hamaraglim, the Torah says, Vatirognu in your tents. So Shimon ben Tarfon Omer, Targum, well, how do you interpret this word of Vatirognu? V'ginisem bi'olo shel mokom. Right, gnai is words that are spiteful, disparaging, negative about the mokom shel mokom. The oel shel mokom is the Mishkan. So even though again their lashon hara was against Eretz Yisrael, but that's equivalent to the mokom of Shechina, which is the Mishkan of Hashem. Faita Adnor Agadol Nahar Pras. Now, Nahar Pras is not such a great river. In fact, if you go back to Bereshis, you'll see the list of the 4 greatest rivers, and Pras is at the bottom of the list. So why is it called Gadol? Shim betarfen omer krav legabi dehina v'idhem. If you have someone who's Moshuach and he's sanctified, then come close to him. Rub off, and he'll rub off on you. So since Nahar Pras is mentioned as close to Eretz Yisrael, therefore it gets upgraded. To Bei Rabbi Shmuel Tana, Eved Melech Kemelech. Right, we respect not only the king, but even the servant of the king, and therefore the Nahar Pras, Euphrates, is considered a servant of Eretz Yisrael. And now we get to Vachenvoni al Pinchasa. So again, let's just go over the Mishnah very quickly. Reuven hires workers and commissions Shimon to pay up his workers and commits himself to repay Shimon for paying up his workers. Shimon claims he was never reimbursed by Reuven. The workers claim they were never paid by Shimon. So basically you have 2 different people who are jumping on Reuven's back and suing him in a court of law. On the one hand, it's going to be the Chenvani, who claims that he shelled out the money and paid the workers. Now he wants to get reimbursed. On the other hand, it's the workers who claim, hey, Reuven, you commissioned us to work and we never got wages, never got paid. So they'll both come and attack Reuven, the Balabayis, and they'll both force him to pay. He'll have to pay twice. And Benanis disagrees because he says that we know one of the 2 Shavuos, whether it's the Shavuot of the workers or the Shavuot of the Chenvani, is going to be a Shavuot Sheker, and we cannot impose 2 Shavuos knowing full well that one will be a Shavuot Sheker. Tanya, we learned to the Raisa, Omer Rebbe, Torach Shavuot Zu Lomel. Why the burden of this Shavuot? Makes no sense. Amalei Reb Chia. Reb Chia turns to his uncle Rebbe and he says to him, Tanina, you taught us in a brisa, Shneim Nishboim V'not Limi Balabayis, that at the same time the workers could claim and take an oath against the Balabayis and force him to pay their wages, and the Chenvani could also take a shvua of Nishba B'notel to force the Balabayis to pay him, to reimburse. So why are you saying Torach Shvua Zu Lama, as if to say that either 1 or 2 of these shvuas are completely superfluous? Kibla mine, or lo kibla mine. Rebbe was quiet, silent. He didn't respond to the objection of Rabbi Chia, who quoted Rebbe from a brisa. Does that mean that Rebbe retracted his statement based on the objection of Rabbi Chia, or no? He continued in his ways. Tashma, we'll learn it from a brisa. Sanya Rebbe Omer, Polim nishboim lechanvani. Now this is very strange. What do you mean Polim nishboim lechanvani? The Polim have to take a shvur to the Balabayas in order to demand payment of wages for the work they did. Why are they taking a shvur to the Chenvani? If the Chenvani has a problem because he says he was never reimbursed, he'll take a shvur against the Balabais. But the workers should certainly be taking a shvur against the Balabais who hired them and hasn't paid wages. So why does it say Polim Nishbam Lechenvani? Okay, that we understood. But Rebbe is saying that the Polim take a shvur to the Chenvani. So the Gemara understands now, this is the Toshma, that the Polim have a right to collect with what? With a shvur. But the Chenvani does not have a legal right to collect with a shvur. So in other words, we don't believe that the Chenvani actually shelled out the money, which he's claiming from the Balabayas, from Reuven, he wants to be reimbursed. So therefore, the workers have a claim against the Chenvani. The Chenvani was commissioned to pay them wages, and we don't believe that they paid him wages. And the Chenvani is not given the opportunity to take a shvur. Omar Rava, no. Rava wants to reinterpret the words Polim nishboim lebalabais. It means, Polim nishboim lechenvani. And it means not that the Polim, owe a shvur to the Chenvani, but it means that they have to take a shvur in the presence of the Chenvani. Polim nishboim lebalabais v'mamed ha-Chenvani. The Polim certainly are taking an oath to substantiate that claim of the Balabais that they weren't paid for their wages. However, in order to strengthen our reliability, so to speak, our reliance on the shvur, we're going to require that the shvur be taken in the presence of the Chenvani. Because basically they're saying to the Chenvani, you're lying through your teeth. You're claiming that you did what you were commissioned to do and you paid, you shelled out wages. I'm sorry, we're going to take a shvur that you didn't shell out wages. We never received our wages. Meaning that if the workers are lying through their teeth, they're going to be very embarrassed when they take a shvur, an oath, in the presence of the Chenvani, and they say the Chenvani never paid us, when they know darn well that the Chenvani did pay him, and the Chenvani knows darn well that he paid them. Itmar, okay, now we start a very, very famous sugya. And this is a sugya in Edus, but really, in its depth, it's a sugya of chazak. And it's a machlokas Rav Huna and Rav Chizda. Shtei kitei edem achisha zu et zu. So we have two pairs of witnesses that contradict one to the other. Therefore, we know one is lying, but we don't know which one is lying. You can't have any crossbreeding here. In other words, if Reuven and Shimon in one cat and Levi and Yisachar in another cat, Reuven can't testify with Levi. That's for sure, because one of them perjured themselves under, in a court of law. But each kat per se has its own cheskes kashrus, and if you're going to say, well, we question the reliability of that kat, so we rely back on chazaka, and you can't passel someone with a suffix, and therefore if Huna says zubav if neatzma ida, v'zubav if neatzma ida. Rav Chisda v'hadi sadi shakri lamali. Rav Chisda says we now have a suffix on each pair of edim, and therefore we have to passel each and every pair of edim unto themselves, because the suffix itself is chal on the edim and it cannot be deflected by chazak. Okay. Now the Gemara is going to go through 4 different scenarios to try to figure out what Rav Huna would say in these cases, in these 4 scenarios, and what Rav Chisda would say in these scenarios. And basically 3 out of 4 are straightforward and simple. It's the 4th that we're going to be left with a take. So let's go through the 4 cases one by one. Shnei malvim ushnei lovim ushnei shtaros. So you've got Reuven and Shimon as malvim. Each one is claiming from his love, and they each one, Reuven, who's claiming from his love, and Shimon from his, has a shtar. So now we have Rav Huna. Rav Huna is going to say Zubab if neatzmu me'ida v'Zubab if neatzmu me'ida, meaning each kat that contradict themselves in the previous case is testifying independent of the second kat on behalf of that malva. So when malva X, Reuven we'll call him, comes to support his claim with his pair of edim, then Rav Huna says we have a chazaka that pair of edim is kosher, and we'll rely on that chazaka will be machshir the edim. And so to Shimon, the second malva has his pair of edim, and once again, uki gavra cheskas kashrus. Now the reason for this is because we've got shnei malvim and shnei lovim. So Hainu Pluktai, Rav Huna will say that each one of these 2 edim can testify and will accept their testimony on behalf of Reuven and Shimon. Malviv, right? And Rav Chisda will say no. Hadi Sadi Shakri normally. Each pair of edim are considered possible. Malve velove ushnei shtaros. Now, these edim signed 2 loan documents, but both kitos, individually, on behalf of one single malva and one single lova. Is yad bal hashtar ala tachtona. Even Rav Chisda will have to agree that one of these 2 shtaros is a valid shtar. Because Rav Chisda knows that one of these 2 pairs of edim was not guilty of lying, so to speak, under oath, as we'd say today. But we don't know which of the 2 shtaros, meaning which of the 2 pairs of edim, is kosher and reliable, so we'll have to take the lower value, the lower price of the 2. Rav Huna would also have to agree in this case that Yodo al ha-tachtona, and the reason for that is because here you've got to figure out which of the 2 edim are possible. Shnei malvim velove echad shnei shtaros. Now we have one love. Is hainu masnisin. This is exactly identical to the case of the chenvani and the pollen. So according to Rav Hunu, says Zuba b'fnei atzmi, the Zuba b'fnei atzmi either. So it's fine, right? We have two shtaros, and even though it's only one love, right? There are two malvim. So each malva is going to come to the lova, same lova, but there are two malvim. And each malva, according to Rav Huna, is producing a shtar that's kosher. And even though we know that one of those two stars is possible, but it doesn't matter because Ruvain malva A comes with his shtar, and Shimon malva B comes with his shtar. The lova is going to have to pay both of them, just like in the case of the Chenvani al Pinkaso, where both the wage earners and the storekeeper will both have taken a shvu, and he has to pay both. But now we get to the case that's complicated. Shnei lovim umalva echad. There are two different lovim, and there's one malva, and the two pairs of Adam again signed respectively on two shtaros. So now the malva is producing both shtaros, but against two different malva. Now, as far as this malva is concerned, he's definitely producing one shtar which is possible. So what would Rav Huna say about this? Very, very unclear. On the one hand, l'chorah Rav Huna would have to admit that since there's only one malva here, the malva, can't use both shtaros, knowing full well that one of those two shtaros is possible. But on the other hand, there are two different lovim. So every time that this single malva will come to lova A and then lova B, so against each individual lova, he has a shtar which is based on chazaka kasha. But once again, the flip side is that he's holding on to two shtaros, knowing full well that one of the two shtaros is possible. Teku, and that's how it ends. Okay, then we'll stop here. Thank you so much, and I apologize about the change in time. Once we get on traveling, and we had an azakah this morning that set us back for a half hour. Actually, I have to tell you the truth.